And we are live. You're watching another episode of the Detective Diaries. I am your host, Greg Lawson. This is where we interview strange and interesting people I find along my paranormal journey. I've been off about the whole month, a little over, I guess, 4 or 5 weeks. I've been down. I had a knee injury, had to have surgery, and I've been on bed rest for almost 5 weeks now. Not allowed to get up, do anything. But I'm sitting up now and I'm trying not to puke. So that's what's been going on with me. But we're back. And last time we had a Detective Diaries, I believe we talked with Sean Freddy. Sean Freddy's a world traveler and a legend. He studies legends. And we talked about the hero's journey. Next week, we're going to talk with Francois LaRosa. He is with Starfield Productions. He is a director, movie director, producer, actor, all-around cool guy. And he did some really cool stuff with his latest big movie that they did. He did a lot of really good investigations leading up to make the movie, and a lot of weird stuff happened. So we're going to talk to him about that. But today, we're going to talk with Jennifer Idle. Jennifer is a friend of mine, and she's a professional photographer, professional scuba diver, creative professional. And let's talk to her and not talk to me. So let's bring in Jennifer. And hey, Jennifer, thanks for coming on your Diaries.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be another person.
Yeah. Have you been social distancing quite a bit?
Very much so.
Yeah, me too. I haven't had contact with anybody in a long time. I've had some visitors this weekend. Some people felt sorry for me. My sister, Sandy Napier and Wayne Napier, came up, and they brought us some food, and that was really nice. And Marty and Kim Valles, friends of ours from San Antonio, came up and fed us and did some stuff, and it was a lot of fun. So that was good, but all of those people have been social distancing also. So I think we were safe about the way we did our visit. But so, hey, I was in charge of the sheriff's underwater recovery team for a little while, and we met while I was assigned over there, correct?
Yes, you were in charge of the dive team. Okay.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, we were kind of bantering back and forth about some underwater forensic stuff. What led you down that lane?
I was asked to contribute an underwater article on underwater forensic photography. As a professional underwater photographer, I bring a certain lens to that expertise, and wanted to connect with the local dive team and highlight the work that you do as public service to help bring closure to people and to help them with their underwater recovery efforts.
Yeah, it was really cool when you came out, and actually we did we had some pretty new divers, and we did a little training down there in Spring Lake down in San Antonio or San Marcos.
So I have been diving there, and I reconnected y'all with the manager of that facility where you can see to do your training.
It helps. There's not a lot of water in Texas that you can actually see in very well.
Well, and the water you work in is a working environment of what I call black water. And it's all by braille, so to speak.
And so I'm sure people are kind of wondering, they're like, okay, well, what else does she do? Well, I know about you, from your stuff on the internet, your website, and also just your personality on the internet for the amount of diving, professional diving that you do, and the fact that you also wrote a book, right?
I did. I wrote a book called An American Immersion. I'm the first woman to dive in all 50 states, and one of my primary missions is to help the world around us, especially as it relates to nature. So that book and quest began when I flew over the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. I wanted to do something to help raise awareness for our local waters. And I was 15 years a longtime local diver here in Central Texas, and wanted to show people the local waters they have near them all across the country. So that became a quest. Also with my first buddy was Ben Castro, who also worked at the Travis County Sheriff's Department as an officer. And he went to the first 27 states with me, which is, it's a feat unto itself.
Yeah. Now, did you get all that knocked out in one swoop, or did you do it over
4 years, 6 months, and 2 days? No,
okay. So, my background in diving is I started diving when I was up in Alaska. I was with the pararescue unit when I was up in Alaska. Mm-hmm. And so 70 something hours I have is basically like scuba diving in a Coke slushy. You couldn't see anything. So we would develop a lot of different tools that we would try to see if it helped out any in that environment. Navigation boards with lights on them and things like that. But if you're in mud, it doesn't matter how bright your light is. It's not going to.
In fact, sometimes it's worse because it just refracts all the particles back into your face.
Right. And, I've been on dives before where we were looking for a body or something, actually usually a body. And it would be long, prolonged dives, very long in length, like following like a jack stay line, run a rope across the river, and you swim back and forth on that rope as you move it along. And I would ask my guys, okay, I'm going to ask you a question at the end of the day, and I need you to be very truthful with your answer. And so at the end of the day, we would debrief, and I would say, okay, I got the question. I want you to think about it, and I want you to answer truthfully, because, cops don't like to be wrong. So
I don't know many people that do.
Yeah. And I would say, okay, while you were searching, were you doing it with your eyes open or your eyes closed? And about half of them would kind of closed.
Really?
Absolutely closed. Yeah. And it's because you get distracted so fast, it just wears you out. You're cruising along that line and you're reaching out trying to touch somebody who's drowned, and it's very stressful. Mm-hmm. And you see something out of the corner of your eye and you're like, ooh, what was that? Oh, it's just a stump, and you go along, ooh, what was that? Oh, it's a deer skull, and so it's just a lot easier just to close your eyes, do your arm sweep, do a push-up, move forward, back in the mud, reach back out, close your eyes, feel through. And anyway, so that's a majority of what I did. I got to do some really cool diving when I was stationed over in the Sinai Desert when I was with the 82nd Airborne Division, and I got to dive a British ship called the Thistlegorm.
Yeah.
And I believe it's the #1 visited wreck in the world right now, or maybe not right now with COVID, but it had been. And the crazy thing about it was Jacques Cousteau dove that wreck in like the late 1950s. This ship was sunk by the Germans. It was at Anchorage in close to the Red Sea, or in the part of the Red Sea, and it was bombed by the Germans. They were just looking for a target of opportunity, and they did it at night. So that's why not very many people died. I believe 7 to 9 sailors died on the Thistlegorm. But it was because people don't get it. You're in a giant metal box. It's the 1940s, so you don't have any air conditioning, and you're in the Middle East. That steel heats up to well over 100 degrees, heats up the interior of the ship. So at night, the only place you can sleep is out on the deck. So the sailors all go out there, strip their clothes off, and just lay a blanket down and lay down on that steel and try to cool off. Well, thank God they were all doing that, because when the bomb hit, took off the stern of the boat, and when it went down, it didn't take a bunch of people down with it, because it went down pretty fast. So anyway, that's I have a couple of pictures of the Thistlegorm. This is what I first saw when I went down. This is not my photo. I pulled this off the internet, but you get the idea. That's what I first saw when I was going down. Is I saw the bow windlass
Mm-hmm.
when I was going down, and the guy that I was with, we had borrowed or we had rented two steel twins,
Mm-hmm.
old tanks. They tasted terrible. I don't know what kind of air was in them, but it was nasty. And he wasn't able to clear his ears at first, so I just went ahead and went down and sat on the bow there and waited for him. And it was pretty amazing. And but that ship is still full of ammunition. It's full of motorcycles. It's got 2 trains on it. It's got old trucks and just all kinds of equipment on it. But anyway, so that's my really big. Really big wreck dive. I've dove some other wrecks, but that one.
Oh, sorry.
Is that me?
No, that's me.
Answer that if you need to get it.
No. I'll have to call her back. It's my aunt.
But I know that you have a lot of experience with wreck diving, and also you have some other unusual experiences. And I thought, man, you would be great to come on and talk to, because I know there's a lot of people that ask me, well, are there ghosts underwater? I mean, and we can talk about that here in a little bit. I'd rather get into, your experiences and what you've done. I know you had a particular experience on the USS Lexington aircraft carrier down there.
Experiences, and I'll share my screen in just a second, and we'll get into some of my stories.
Cool.
Like you're sharing the history of the Thistlegorn, because it sets up in a nice way a lot of what I'm going to show with regards to wreck diving, and as it relates to what I call real wrecks versus purpose sunk wrecks. So all of the wrecks I'm showing are wrecks that were mishaps, accidents, tragedies. They're not the purpose sunk wrecks, which are intentionally sunk wrecks for recreational or technical diving excursions, for practice, for looking through, having maybe an artificial reef. There's lots of different reasons we sink some of these wrecks that happen. But I'm showing real wrecks. And what's important to this is the history behind it and some of the respect that comes, because it's not always true that people get to escape a wreck. You know? And wrecks, as you mentioned, can sink very, very quickly. Very often, if a wreck is happening, it's in untoured conditions. Most of the wrecks in the Great Lakes are because of really bad weather. People don't realize how big the Great Lakes are. They're almost oceanic in scale.
Yeah.
And they can be really rough, maybe even rougher than the ocean at times, because unlike the ocean that has directional waves, it's hitting the sides of the containing land mass. So you end up with lots of different chops surging through.
Yeah, short, choppy waves. Yeah.
Sure. So I'm glad you set up some of the history. We'll address why that's meaningful in these wrecks, and we've addressed kind of the difference between purpose sunken and these real wrecks. So everything that I'm showing will be real wrecks. But
cool.
Before I share my screen, I have to mention that poster behind you. Creature of the Black Lagoon.
Right.
So in addition to growing up in Texas, people ask me, well, how does a person from Texas become an underwater photographer? Well, we have water in Texas. Let's dispel that myth right now. And we even have things to look at in that water that are worthy subjects. But in addition to that, I had the benefit of spending my summers in Florida. And Creature from the Black Lagoon was shot in Silver Springs, Florida,
nice.
In Ocala, which is right next to where I got to spend my summers. And it's a spring, not unlike Spring Lake, where you and I went diving.
It's one of my favorite old movies from when I was a kid. That and Frogs. I really like. It was a terrible B movie, but I just thought it was amazing to me. But hey, let's take a look at some of the comments. I got some comments coming in.
Okay.
Kat Ward, I can always count on Kat to come on. She's from Australia. Found some cool and famous haunted wrecks. She shared that on the stream. If y'all want to grab that and look at some of that. Let's see who else. Oh, hey, Francois. He chimed in. He's going to be talking with us next week. And If you guys have any questions, you guys that are watching, if you have any questions, please go down, put it in the comments, write a short question in the comments. We'll get to it. If we don't get to it during the show, we'll get to it after the show on Facebook and answer your questions. If you can share and like this broadcast, you would not believe how many views I get when all you guys share the broadcast and it gets out there. I get hundreds and hundreds of views. So back to Jennifer. All right, I'm going to bring your.
Can you see my screen share?
I can. Boom.
Awesome.
There you are.
That's what I look like when I'm working. Not usually in my office behind my desk, although I do a fair bit of that. And that is my primary camera rig. So I have a primary and secondary camera rig, and you see I'm wearing those double steels that you mentioned, although mine have been visually inspected and they have no rust or contaminants in them.
That's probably a good thing, I'm guessing.
Definitely a good thing for your dive safety. Diving is complicated, and diving, some of the wrecks can be a recreational experience or it can be more involved. My history with wrecks began as a native Texan in my youth, before I was really diving prolifically. I started diving when I was 14. And I grew up spending my summers on the coast in Corpus Christi, Texas, as well, where they have the USS Lexington. She's also known as the Blue Ghost, and she's an aircraft carrier. This is an important wreck to mention because it was my first sort of paranormal experience. And I didn't experience it alone, which makes it super awesome and not so unique, you know.
Right.
Because it wasn't just my eyes. We actually went down there for a Habitat for Humanity church project. And this is another look at the aircraft carrier from World War II. It is a museum. You can go travel the decks of the USS Lexington. When they first brought this into port here, they sank, I think, the bottom 6 decks below water. So it's actually sitting on the bottom in the Gulf of Mexico there. And so it's stationary, not moving. Hurricane's not going to disrupt it. We're okay. But they didn't, because of the massive size. These are almost 1,000 feet long, these ships. And because of that, they hadn't gone through and made the whole ship a museum yet. So it has a storied ghost history. And it's had its share of service during World War II. There were some incidents, particularly in the bow of the ship, which you see on the right side. The front right section was blown apart at one point, and some people lost their lives there. One thing you will find in common with all of these real wrecks and what I'm showing you is there were lives lost in these battles and in these wrecks. And most of these are World War II era ships that I'm showing in this presentation. So when we went there, well, I'm not going to tell you how long ago, because then you'll find out I'm older than that look. But in my youth, we went there as a youth group with my mom and about 8 other kids. We paid our tickets, we went on board, and we were excited to learn about the history of this ship. They have a really nice Pearl Harbor exhibit up in the bow of the ship. And we knew after our experience of more of the haunted stories that happen here. Boy Scouts like to camp here overnight. They know about the stories. There are paranormal meetings on this ship. Back then, as I mentioned, not everything was open. And some of that is because it's a real World War II ship and rust happens inside ships. Be that underwater when we're diving them, it's a hazard if you have falling debris. Or here, if you're with gravity, and you're walking on rusted out floors. So not everything is open until they deem it safe. They air condition it. We're in Texas. It gets to be 110 outside. And like you were saying, it can be way too hot to be inside a steel-hulled ship.
Right.
In those temperatures. So we're going through, and we, as we enter the main deck hangar bay, and we're wowed by the exhibits they're showing there, we meet a gentleman dressed in his military outfit, and he offers to give us a tour. And we thought, well, this is our first time kind of taking a look at this. We'd love a tour. And so we went on a tour with just gentlemen. dressed in his uniform, and we support our vets, and we're excited to see him. He led us through to the bow of the ship and through to the medical bay, which was not yet open during this tour. Now you can see the medical bay. When we saw it, all the medical equipment was in place, and it was hot. There was no air conditioning. We're going through. We had a great tour with this guy. And then we come out at the end of the tour and we leave, and we're so excited about this great tour we had with somebody who knows the history of the ship in detail, who's dressed in authentic military uniform. And we go and we thank the ticket people. We go, thank you so much for giving our church group a private tour of the ship through all of the areas that we wouldn't have been able to see otherwise. And then they say, well, we don't do tours. So we go, well, we're going to ignore that for now. But
so do you think that they were playing a joke on you, or do you?
No. I mean, it was a full tour. The gentleman gave us the whole tour. They don't give tours. We looked into it. I mean, That's the real thing. They weren't pulling our legs. We weren't accidentally taken on a tour by somebody. This is self-guided tours. Even today, it's self-guided. So we went home and we looked into it, and it turns out there is a well-known ghost who does exactly this. And you can research on your own time on the internet, but on the USS Lexington, and I forget his name, we looked, and he really does do tours of the ship. So we were like, oh dear. Now they say the engine room is haunted on this ship. I've never noticed any weird activity on the engine room aside from it being a hot, stuffy, crowded place that you don't really want to hang out in because it's boring. On a scuba dive, it can be interesting to get to the engine room because it's one of the few artifacts that's got large enough things to look at.
And usually in the engine room, you have quite on some of the bigger ships anyway, you have quite a bit of room that you can actually, navigate through. But
but this is so full of the old mechanics. I mean, these are not nuclear powered vessels. These do not have the space that today's military vessels have on them.
Right.
They're very crowded, small places. They have all kinds of details, like there's more telephones on this aircraft carrier than in most small cities. Like, it's just got like ridiculous amounts of stuff in it, even in World War II. So we went back, and it does indeed look like we were led by a ghost through the USS Lexington.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a bit unreal. And my mom and I talk about this to this day. And I'm in touch with some of the other youth. I'll have to talk to some of my buddies and see what they remember about that experience. I haven't conferred with them.
So the Lexington obviously is not sunk. It was blown up. Hundreds of people died on it, and it's now a museum. You can go down Corpus Christi.
Hundreds, but many people died, and certainly many injured died. They were at war.
Yep. Yeah. So what do you think about actual wrecks that are sunk on the bottom? What do you think about like paranormal activity on stuff like that?
Oh, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to show you some pictures. So this is the sister ship, the USS Oriskany, sunk off the coast of Pensacola. And this is a purpose sunk ship. Now, I don't believe, I don't get the sense that the Lexington is necessarily haunted as much now. They have really covered the spaces and built out the museum, and it feels like it's been emptied out. It feels different than it felt before, if that makes any sense. But historically, the USS Oriskany is another aircraft carrier, the sister ship. Some of the artifacts of the Oriskany are on the Lexington, and this is a purpose sunk wreck. You can see this is the hangar bay that we entered on the Lexington. This is the Oriskany's hangar bay underwater. And I show these as an introduction to some of the inside spaces to give a feel for what it looks like underwater when you're going through these wrecks. And as I joked a little earlier, ghosts don't need air to breathe. So I feel like the encounters you have with a haunted wreck are maybe people at unrest. And that's why it's not really on a purpose sunk wreck. I didn't feel any activity on the Oriskany. This is a technical dive. I bring this to kind of introduce what it looks like.
What's the depth on that?
It's 220 feet to the sand. At the hangar bay here, I'm at 175 feet. So this is a technical dive to get to these depths. You can get to the tower as a recreational diver, but below that, you can't get there without technical dive training and mixed gases to make it safe to do what we call decompression diving. And as you see on wrecks, they're really well known for placing memorials. So there's a firefighter's helmet. I believe that was left from 9/11. There's a cap from a person. These are left from people who served on the Oriskany. So the service members who served on these ships very often still have a connection to the ship. And that makes sense as to why a person would still maybe haunt a ship like the Lexington. They're still connected to that space. And the living are connected to it, and they'll put memorials, they'll put mementos, things that show their presence as servicemen. And in fact, I think in Pearl Harbor, they still, as Pearl Harbor survivors die, have the option, I believe, to be buried on the wreck there.
Oh, wow.
So World War II was really prevalent in all of this as kind of the last major maritime seas war that was fought. What you're looking at here is a German U-boat, the U-352 off the coast of North Carolina. Now this has remains on it, and this may indeed be haunted. You are not permitted to enter this. And as I mentioned, the Arizona has certain protections. The German government asks that nobody penetrate the U-352. There are remains on board. I know this from people who have seen them. And U-boats in particular are small spaces. So when you're entering wrecks, especially these real wrecks, there are hazards, there's hanging wires. It's, a purpose sunk wreck that's intentionally sunk for the purpose of going through it has the doors blasted out for safety. There's, as few entanglement and entrapment hazards as possible. Because what you don't also want to do is contribute to lives lost on wrecks
Right.
with modern accidents. And people die while diving on many of these wrecks as well. So there have been people connected to them who have lost their lives, trying to enjoy or explore some of the history. Now, the U-352 had sunk the Papoose, which is nearby and lays upside down in the sand off the coast of North Carolina waters, and then was sunk by the Coast Guard, I think like 3 days after it sunk the Papoose. So as I get into Newfoundland, you will see when it comes to the German U-boats, they better be careful who they shoot at because things change. So here you have both what this boat torpedoed and then the effects of this boat resting at the bottom of the ocean. You can walk the decks, if you're not a diver, of a similar model boat, kind of like the Lexington and the Oriskany. The U-352 has a U-boat in Chicago at the Field Museum of Science and History that you can actually tour. So you can get a sense for what life was like on these U-boats. This is a hatch on the U-boat, and you can see it's really small. So with me wearing the doubles that you saw at the beginning, there's no way I would fit through that hole. I'm too big. And this is one of the reasons that diving these wrecks is fairly hazardous. Now this is the clapper on Bell Island in Newfoundland. And Newfoundland was its own country before it joined Canada. The Bell Island is off the coast of St. John's in that area, if you're familiar with Newfoundland. And Newfoundland is it's a big island in and of itself. So you fly to St. John's, or you take the ferry from the mainland to get there. And then you take another boat to get out to Bell Island. Bell Island is a unique iron-rich island that was set up for mining. The iron ore to produce it produced the steel hulls that were being built during World War II, especially, and it was a significant producer of the ore. Bell Island during World War II had several clients. They had Germany, the US, Canada, and England among their clients. At one point in their history, World War II broke out, and they decided that Germany was no longer a good person to have as a client. So they cut them off.
Imagine why.
But they were a previous client. So Germany retaliated, came back to Bell Island with the intent of taking the island and taking the mining operation for themselves. They were fortunately unsuccessful at this, and this was at the beginning of the war, because Newfoundland, smartly got out of business with them at the beginning. And at the beginning of the war, they had less experienced captains captaining the U-boats. So when they came over, they made some errors in judgment in the torpedoes they shot. One of them, they were aiming at a merchant ship and missed and blew up. What you're seeing here is the remains of the dock where they would offload the iron ore, thus removing their chances of gaining access to the ore for themselves. This is a look inside the mine at where they do their mining. As you can see, they hit water and it's flooded. The pumps aren't on once you get down to a certain depth. And there are people now exploring these sections of the mine underwater. Famous photographers like Jill Heinerth are really notable for exploring these sections of the Earth, and she actually runs a program called Into the Planet. But the mines here were an important part of history. You can see what it looked like. It was a muddy, dark place, really hard living. It was horse-powered work back then. And they would actually bring horses down into the mines. They would stay down there for 3 months at a time. They had stables, and you can imagine the smell underground in a contained space. And they would keep the horses down there for a period of time, and then they would have to condition them, and they learned to put blinders on the horses as they brought them back to the sunlight so that the horses would stay in darkness and slowly adjust back to life on land when they brought them out of the mine and cycled in the next row of horses.
Do they do tours there?
Yes, absolutely. And the tours are conducted with former miners too.
Oh, so wow.
You can get people who really were a part of the history and can show you, or they're descendants of the people who were miners. So it's really a worthwhile exhibit to get into these mines and see what was going on and to see all this history. They're both big and small, and it's a maze of tiny little passages, all of which look alike. So they have a numbering system to try to keep people from getting lost. But it was hazardous work. And now you see it's lit by modern day electricity. They didn't have those advantages back then. They had, gas lighting. So you can imagine that it was a big deal when the Germans blew up that dock that made retrieving this ore all that more difficult and less problematic. Nonetheless, they wanted to prevent the US, Canada, and England from acquiring the ore and building their ships as well. If you recall, there was a big effort to build things like the Liberty ships. My grandpa actually helped construct a Liberty ship during his service. And the ore from that came from Bell Island in Canada. So you can see that although they are merchant ships, there were 4 major merchant ships sunk by U-boats during this excursion. And they were armed with some guns, and they sank in place. All of these wrecks are protected. And we've talked a little bit about how there are people aboard these ships still. They are what we call war graves, and we respect them. We don't touch the artifacts. We don't disturb the things that are on these wrecks out of respect for the people who are resting there. And this is off the bow of one of those 4 ships. It's the bow gun that you can see there. Pretty substantial. So what you're looking at here is the midsection of the ship, and that is actually the hole left in the ship by the torpedo that sank the ship, straight in the middle. So you can get a sense for the scale and the damage and the wreckage and the mayhem that occurred from that wreck. And I've got my dive buddy there to give kind of some scale for what you're looking at. You can see that the side of the ship is just ripped out, just like melted metal. So it was significant and traumatic. And I think that contributes to the presence. There is a paranormal presence associated with the wrecks on Bell Island. This is the bow of one of the ships as well. Looking, you can see it's encrusted with life. Unlike a purpose sunk wreck, everything that sank with the ship is still on the ship. And here's another look at a different one of the bows. You can see that they're just massive ships. So this is cold water diving. Any diving can be done appropriately. I know we have people from all over the world joining us. And there are people who live in cold places. I live in a hot place. So it's hard for people to imagine diving in cold places here because we don't even really wear coats until January.
Right.
But it's as if you were getting dressed for winter. We have appropriately dressed materials to dress in. And here we do dry suit diving to make this comfortable.
So yeah, when I was up in Alaska, it was in 83, and we didn't always have dry suits to go in. So sometimes we would end up in pretty heavy wetsuits, and then we would pour warm water in them, and that would keep you okay for about 30 minutes, and then you had to pull out. I mean, that's just a bounce dive to wherever you're going, and you're in and out very quickly.
These are 30-minute to an hour-long dives.
Yeah, because the water's so cold. And the depth.
Yeah, depth, time. Well, and that's what you can get out of your air supply. Unless you're on a rebreather, you could do longer dives. Mm-hmm. We were diving doubles or side mount in all of these, so everyone had at least 2 tanks to give us more air supply, because these are fairly deep wrecks. I mean,
right,
100 feet, 80 feet, so they're not super shallow.
Yeah, you can suck a tank dry pretty quick. For those of you who are watching, if you have any questions for Jennifer, go down in the comments, write a quick question. We'll try to answer it. Also, if you can like and share this broadcast, it would be great. You can also check out my YouTube channel at The Paranormal Detective Greg Lawson YouTube channel. The interesting thing about the, when we were talking about Canada, and we were talking about different wrecks and stuff like that. Oh,
I'm getting there.
Okay, all right.
I'm getting there. You can see, we talked about the memorials left behind by living people who served on wrecks. These are memorials in honor of the people who were lost on the wrecks. And so there are memorials throughout the wrecks to honor the deceased. This was a small mining community. As I mentioned, there are still dissidents who live on the island, in and around the island. You can see the artifacts, the twisted metal. Here you have an anchor chain that got thrown from the bow of this wreck, and we're on the stern of the wreck, and it just totally got thrown clear across the ship all the way to the back of the ship. So you can see, the power and the twisted metal and everything that happened. What I'm trying to get to are some of the artifacts that are on this ship. And as I mentioned, they're protected. You're not to disturb any of these things. This is a radio. I'm going to forget the name of the radio right now. But it was an old radio in the radio room. You can see people operated these things, lived on these. You can see, shoes and artifacts left from the people who were living and working on these wrecks. These ships are your home. When you're out on the ocean, they have all of the essentials that you need to live. You can see, communications devices. They have dinner plates, all kinds of artifacts that were important to the people living and working on these ships. I can't show you the gas mask. There was a gas mask that was deployed and in use by a person and left behind when they were hit. And it used to be an artifact that was on the bow of this wreck. Unfortunately, when I got there and I was going there, in part, I was documenting some of these artifacts and taking a look at them. We noticed that some of them had been removed, which was unusual. They are protected. They're often federally protected. If you think treasure hunting is complicated, artifacts on wrecks are not things to collect. And sometimes you can piss off things that go beyond, federal laws. And such was the case, it turned out, with some of the clothing items, personal effects, and gas masks. There were artifacts that I was unable to see while I was there. While I was diving this wreck, I came back up to the surface and I talked to the dive master and I said, well, what happened? We looked and looked and looked, and he said, the gas mask would be there. And he goes, I don't know. It's supposed to be right here. So we went off and we did some more diving for the next 2 or 3 days. And I was documenting for Ocean Quest a lot of their other operations, their, whale tours and those kinds of things. And when I came back to the boat with that dive master, he said, you're not going to believe this. But we heard that the artifacts were found and recovered. And it turns out, because they're protected and there's only one scuba operator out there, it had to be a private citizen that took these off, because the commercial operator respects the wreck, respects the people whose lives were lost on the wreck. Well, it turns out that one of the local citizens, who was actually a doctor in the town, had gone out with his private vessel and his buddy and took the gas mask and the other effects that we were out there specifically to look at and document, and took them off the wreck and put them on his private vessel. Apparently, when he went back, he was back and he was working on the boat or something, and all of a sudden the boat turned on its own with nobody turning it on or on the boat to do anything with it. And it chopped off his right arm, which was the arm he used to collect the artifacts with. So, and when I had come back and I talked to the diver, I had also told him, I was like, well, you don't mess with ghosts. You don't mess with the dead. You don't test them. And then, so when I came back on the boat 3 days later, he was like, oh, you were not going to believe this. And I was the biggest
Wow.
told you so ever. And I was like, I don't mean to be insensitive. And I'm sorry that he lost his arm. And that's really tragic, because now he was a surgeon. He couldn't do his job either.
No more. He's not.
No mas.
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of stuff is amazing to me whenever you see, some sort of what people say as a haunting, or, a ghost or something like that. And then when you correlate, like with this, maybe retribution from
3 days before this guy loses his arm. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh dear, I didn't mean to bring that on or like summon anybody. I'm sorry.
Right. It's a great study in coincidence, right?
You don't go digging up graves. It's a disrespectful thing to do. These wrecks, these artifacts, these things that are here preserved, they're also, they're graves. You don't disturb the dead. It's just asking for trouble.
Right.
And unfortunately that guy found out that was trouble indeed.
Yeah. No kidding.
So this is 220 feet on the Oriskany, and you can see it can feel very isolated and alone on these wrecks. And one thing when you're talking about the paranormal, you see all these horrible, like badly documented, fuzzy images when people do their online shows or whatnot. But you can see, you can get really remote on these wrecks in a hurry, and you can get lost. And like I said, you don't want to become one with the dead on the wrecks. But just it gives you a sense of how dark it is. This is diving midday. You know, if you go to the surface, it's going to be a bright, sunny Texas day, just like you have right now with not a cloud in the sky. But you can see midday how dark it is at 220 feet in the ocean with the particulate and everything that obscures your view. So we take dive lights, we take significant equipment. And so it can be easy to also spook yourself out and feel something. There is something to be said about feeling something paranormal or seeing a cause and an effect. You know, a guy getting his arm chopped off immediately following removal of artifacts from a war grave seems like a pretty solid cause and effect there. Or being led on a tour by a corporeal kind of element there. Those kinds of things are more present. Just having a feeling doesn't always signify something, but you do feel things on these wrecks. You do feel things in places.
Right. Charlie was the ghost on the Lexington. Lynn chimed in on
that. Thank you.
Charlie, yeah.
See, yeah. I didn't make it up.
No.
Just stunned when we got done that there's a real ghost that's there. It's too bad I wasn't, taking photos of it at the time. At least I was in good company. So there's something to be said about, not people say, well, why can't we remove artifacts from wrecks? Well, this is a very good reason why it's maybe not a good idea to take things, especially if it's out of disrespect or greed or something, ill motivated, because I think that goes into kind of your little karmic world. But you do feel things, these are big steel-hulled ships, physically we can feel gravitational pulls. And you and I were talking about Yellowstone, which is one of the places that I venture. I recently produced a short film with Alex Rose called Protected Waters Exploring Yellowstone, in which we document these giant underwater spires and the life that lives on them. One of the unique things is you can see I dive in, like you, environments that aren't bright blue, clear water all the time. So with the spires, you can have 3-foot visibility, no foot visibility, or 10-foot or 30-foot visibility.
So I have to stop you there. How in the world? Because I know it's illegal to dive in Yellowstone, right?
No, you can dive in national parks. Yeah.
You can. Do you have to have permits or anything to go in there?
Not to dive it. As a professional underwater photographer and filmmaker, I had to apply for a permit to have the right to use my footage for my documentary.
Because there's some pretty dangerous areas in Yellowstone for a diver, right?
Well, yes, and if you kill yourself, that's bad. So, I stay out of West Thumb Geyser Basin because I like my skin. There are underwater geysers just like there are on land. So
did you video any of the underwater geysers?
No, they melted an underwater remote operated sub.
I'm just asking. I don't know.
No, I hang out with the spires. Now that lake is 40 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's cold water.
Okay. Which
you wouldn't expect because you're surrounded by like water that's like 1,000 degrees or like crazy temperatures with these, greater than boiling springs.
Danny's got a question about Charlie. How long were you guys with him when he was?
It was like a 30-minute tour.
That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah, it was like, and we had no idea. We were amazed by all the history that we were being, and he had all these firsthand kind of experiences that he told us. We just didn't know they really were firsthand experiences.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
Oh man. So do you have any pictures from the Yellowstone?
Yeah, it'd be a different file. If you can bear with me, I certainly have lots of Yellowstone. I even have Yellowstone video if you want to see a little bit of what that looks like.
So I know you and I have talked about underwater metal detecting. I talked to you the other day about Gypsy Jules, who does
Mhm.
surface metal detecting, and she does rivers and shallow water, but not that. And you were talking about, well, that's not what I do. I'm busy enough having to deal with my own buoyancy, my own equipment, my own.
You see that camera is huge.
Yeah, it is huge. And so, if these wrecks could possibly have some sort of residual haunting or an active haunting on them, the best way to capture something like that down there would be through video, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I can't imagine any other way to really do anything, because even if you bring in, let's say you had some sort of mechanism, a ghost detecting mechanism of some sort.
Well, that's what I was getting into with these spires. So they have a magnetic field, with the ships, there's a big steel hole. It can mess with your electronic equipment, your compasses, that kind of thing. And these spires, you feel before you see them, like they have a magnetic presence.
Right.
And as you get near it, your compass will spin, because it messes with that compass bearing, whatever the composition is of that silicious material.
Are they made out of iron? The spires? Do you know what the makeup is?
Silicious material, so a silica kind of, it is an earth extruded material that grew over bacterial filaments.
Gotcha.
And the bacterial filaments are gone, so it's actually porous, these big spires. And I have here a trailer for the film if you want to see that.
Well, yeah, sure. Let me.
See the spires? So that's kind of something that you could accomplish, like you were saying, with video of like paranormal activity.
And that's the thing about scuba diving is, let's say some paranormal investigators wanted to go down and check a wreck and do an investigation on if it's haunted. Well, you have a very short amount of time because of the amount of air that you have, depending on the depth of the structure. So it might be better just to buy a bunch of cheap 1080p fish cameras with long cords on them and just place them on the wreck. No?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about documenting something over time to get paranormal activity.
Yeah, because you have such little time as a diver to be down there.
There are motion activated. We use it for sharks, for collecting data on wildlife. Just like wildlife motion censored cameras, you can do the same thing underwater. So it won't record unless there is movement.
Okay. Cool. So
you have that. You would also have to know the history of the wreck and where you might suspect that activity. So it's pretty obvious. I didn't show bones in this. I've seen bones. It's not for everybody. So there are.
Anybody who watches this broadcast likes bones.
Oh, okay. And there are other things besides wrecks where there are lives lost. And I was really surprised on a local body of water where I found that the safety divers thought they pulled out the entire skeleton, and there are several pieces, including a jawbone and a long bone and some remains in there that they thought were removed. We did not tell people they're still down there. Only few of us know where this is and what they're there, because we want the families to still stay at rest and at peace and not be upset with the safety divers or anything that happened. And I mean, that was 40 years ago now. So we figure that the bones are at peace where they are. So we leave them and we don't mess with them. If you see bones, don't mess with them.
Well, I know we could probably sit down and brainstorm different ways to try to capture some sort of paranormal stuff underwater, and we could probably brainstorm for hours on this. The crazy part is we've been talking now for 56 minutes.
Yep.
We're almost done. Do you got anything else? Did you have anything else that you wanted to share?
Just if people want to get in touch with me, they're welcome to. My current company is the Underwater Designer, and you can see that there. Very shortly in the next month, I'll be launching my brand update as Fins Up Creative, because I provide creative services. I do web design, graphic design. I did all the logos. I designed my book. So, I do all of the motion graphics for the videos, all these things. So if people have questions later, they're welcome to get in touch with me.
Well, I want you to know I can't thank you enough for coming on, because like I said, I could sit here with you for hours and talk about this kind of stuff. There'll be people probably making comments and asking questions, stuff like that.
Somebody says bone picks, please.
Yeah, see? What'd I tell you? Yeah, there you go. Mike Sanchez, of course. Yeah, got to have the bone picks.
Yeah, no, maybe another time.
Yeah.
I just never know my audience. It's a new audience. As you said, my primary income and practice is as an underwater photographer and professional scuba diver, doing wreck diving, doing all these kinds of different activities, graphic design, that sort of thing. I don't actually make any money at the paranormal, so right. I have no skin in the game.
No, and that's one of the reasons I wanted you to come in and talk with us is, you're not in that realm, but
I have personal experiences.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of places and a lot of things. They may not be the most haunted wrecks in the world, but they certainly do have a presence, and they certainly have stories.
Yeah.
So, and I'd say those Newfoundland wrecks definitely are haunted. So,
and those and the diving that you do, yeah, I'm not doing that. I've done my amount of diving.
Oh, we can do it.
No. Yeah, we'll do some shallower wreck diving, but no, I'm hanging up my stuff after this surgery, I think. But I want you to know I really appreciate you coming on, and if there's anything I could ever do for you, please get in touch with me.
Likewise.
So, thank you, Jennifer, and I will talk to you soon. Okay.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll look for comments and try to answer as I see them.
All right. See you later.
Rock.
All right. Now that was Jennifer Idle. She's a personal friend of mine. She's the underwater designer, professional photographer, underwater photographer, technical diver, and all around really cool chick. And I really wanted to have her on. I'd like to have her on again and talk specifically about some other stuff. And of course, we can have the bones picks then also. Make sure that if you could go down and you like and share the broadcast, it would be great. Check out on Travel Channel Expedition Bigfoot. They're out. I believe they're out filming right now for their second season. If you haven't seen the first season, it's entertaining. It's the next step in Bigfoot searching. Using technology and algorithms and things like that. Also, check out the Halser Files. If you haven't seen any of the Halser Files, the first season is out. The second season is being filmed as we speak. Dave Schrader and his crew are out doing that stuff. And also Kindred Spirits. They're a lot of fun on the Travel Channel. So next week, we'll be talking with Francois LaRosa. And we're going to talk about making movies and doing research in the occult while making the movies and all kinds of weird things that can happen. And we'll do that next Tuesday. So I am Greg Lawson. I really appreciate you guys tuning in, and I hope to see you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye.